Oh, you're at that.
Good morning. This is Pat O'Connell calling to order the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission's regular open meeting. It's Thursday, September 5th, 10 a.m. A hybrid meeting. We're here in the Bocum Building in Santa Fe. Mr. Cameron, please call the roll.
Commissioner Ellison,
Present.
Commissioner Aguilera,
Present.
Commissioner O'Connell.
Here.
All three commissioners are here and you have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Next up is Pledge of Allegiance. So all rise. Okay, so we have an agenda that was posted in advance of this meeting. I think it was actually posted last week because Monday was a holiday. Are there any changes we need to make to the agenda before we proceed?
I have no suggested changes, Mr. Chair.
Neither do I.
Okay, so seeing no changes, we'll proceed with the agenda as posted. Next up is public comment. Do we have anybody here who'd like to provide public comment? Got at least one, two. Okay, so sir, could you go ahead and join us and then push the button to turn the mic green and go ahead and start with just introducing yourself. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Mike Foote. I'm an energy and environmental attorney, former legislator working on energy issues and working with SunShare and its local subsidiary CSOL. And I do policy and regulatory work for them. Myself and a group of us were in the area, in Santa Fe area, kind of working on these community solar facilities, trying to get them in the ground as soon as possible, including a site visit around Santa Fe. And so I just thought I would wanted to stop in and do an in-person meeting instead of just watching virtual meetings, and introduce myself mainly for no other reason, I guess, than you may, be looking back and seeing someone watching you and not knowing who the heck this guy is. So I just thought I would do that. But we're super excited. CSOL is super excited to get started as soon as we can on installing these community solar facilities in New Mexico. Obviously, it's a beautiful state with some really great renewable energy resources. And it appears the legislature and the executive branch are all in with community solar, which is, of course, music to our ears. I think that they, and I believe you all as well, see some of the real benefits of community solar for, making sure that it helps with energy grid resiliency, making sure that it can help with the renewable energy transition, which we all need to do as quickly as possible, helping with energy choice, helping with reducing energy rates for customers, including LMI customers. So there's many benefits that will help the community with community solar. And as I said, we're really looking forward to helping provide those. Obviously it's a new program, as you know, and there's always challenges with the new program, including with the utilities, but we're doing what we can to try to work out those challenges and bring something that you all will be proud of when it actually does happen. I think you're going to like it. SunShare and CSOL are really at the forefront of putting in ecovoltaics and agrivoltaics and using that philosophy to make sure that the land can be preserved and or it can be used for dual purposes. And we brought that philosophy to other developments in other states, including Colorado and New Mexico. And one that I'll mention just very in particular is a facility in Minnesota where the community as well as us agreed that it would be good to have a pollinator-friendly area after the facility was put in. So we employed a number of construction techniques as well as some restoration after the fact to make it pollinator-friendly. And now there's a facility there that produces some honey for the local residents, and I've been told that it's been delicious. So really proud of that, and we'll bring that same kind of philosophy to New Mexico development as well. And as I said, we really look forward to getting started and hope to be able to work with you here in the near future. So thank you very much for the time. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment this morning. It's nice to have a personal touch. Mr. Desjardins.
Good morning, Chairman. Okay, I'm good now, I think. Okay, thank you. Good morning, Chairman McConnell, Commissioners Aguilera, Ellison. My name is Jim Desjardins. I'm the Executive Director of Renewable Energy Industries Association of New Mexico, known as RIA-NM. One of the initiatives that RIA-NM has been part of at the Commission is the update to the 2008 interconnection rule. It was a 2.5-year process, and RIA-NM worked with many stakeholders, including prominent national organizations and experts, and a new rule went into effect on February 2023. The Interstate Renewable Energy Council, IREC, gave the new rule an A rating, the only state to receive such a high grade. During this time, 16 to 19 PNM distribution lines were closed to solar and were closed until very recently, about 2 weeks ago. Since the implementation of the rule, PNM has on numerous times asked for variances from the new rule. Notably was a recent request to extend variances already granted for non-export systems, simplified and fast-track screening for systems greater than 250 kW, and for systems that could backfeed on the Albuquerque downtown network. To justify this request, PNM cited a hosting analysis study dated May 22nd, 2024, and that study stated there were 29 feeders at saturation. This was done by 1898 and Company. RIA-NM filed objections to this variance request, and the Commission responded by requesting more information. That PNM refiled their request on August 23rd. In their filing on August 23rd, PNM reversed course on 2 of those variance requests and said that they were no longer needed and that only 2 distribution lines were now closed to solar. And they cited a new study, a hosting capacity solution study dated 8/23/2024 by 1898 and Company, the same company that did the previous study 3 months ago. While we are thankful, and I'm assuming many of the customers that want solar for this new analysis, but it should be noted that for many years, people were denied access to solar. And this also affected the contractors that would have done these installations, the subcontractors, distributors, and other parties as well. And there was a missed opportunity to provide clean energy that was not produced. We believe there is a better way. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your comments this morning. Mr. Rodriguez, do we have anyone registered online for public comment?
Mr. Chair, we do not have anyone registered online.
Great, thank you. So that concludes public comment on the agenda. We're into the announcement section. Go ahead and start with Office of General Counsel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any announcements from OGC.
Great, thank you. There's a couple hearings or ways for folks to participate in the work we do coming up between now and our next scheduled open meeting. First off is a hearing that's scheduled to start next Tuesday, September 10th at 9 a.m. It's El Paso Electric Renewable Energy Plan, and that's case number 2400176 UT. The next day, the 12th, 9 a.m. start also is scheduled a hearing in PNM's Renewable Energy Plan. That's case number 2400207 UT. So if you'd like to see how those cases are going, you can go to our webpage and see the documents that have been filed on eDocket. There's also information for how to watch or participate in those hearings on the webpage. And then the following week, we're going to have a public comment on the community solar rule. So there's a number of initiatives going around community solar. One of them is working on the revisions to the rule. So that's case number 24-00094 UT, scheduled for 10 a.m. start. Again, that's the following Wednesday. And again, check out the webpage to find ways to participate in the comment session on that rule. We'd love to hear from you on that. That's the announcements I knew of. Commissioners, did you have any others?
Yes, I have one announcement. I would like to introduce Kai Fillion, who is my new technical advisor. And you guys on this side of the room can't see him, but he's standing up. I'm very excited to have him as an advisor. He is coming from within the PRC. He was an economist in the utility division. And so I think he'll really do a great job in helping me. Outside of being an economist and my technical advisor, I know that Kai has 3 interests, biking, food, and biking to get food. That's all I have.
Thank you. Okay, so the next on the agenda is Employee of the Month. It is my turn. So Employee of the Month for September 2024 is Kevin Gedko. So Mr. Gedko had been nominated by his boss. Can hear the applause in the cool kids room. Kevin's been working at the PRC for a year. The nomination from his boss, Scott Cameron, is that he's been a valuable team member in Office of General Counsel since day one. Lately gone far above and beyond usual stellar work by taking on extremely burdensome project on short notice with little previous preparation. Bringing the project across the finish line, he has worked countless hours and given up time on weekends to ensure the final product is up to his usual high standards. Same time, he's managed to continue to be a resource to his team members and provide valuable input on OGC issues. Kevin's dedication and work ethic reflect his deep commitment to the agency, public service, and his colleagues. As such, he's a great role model for us all and highly deserving of this recognition. So this notice that you'll receive, and somewhere there's a belt. I don't know. That so resolved, the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission of the State of New Mexico congratulates Kevin Gedko on his selection as Employee of the Month for September 2024, issued today at this place. So congratulations, Mr. Gedko, and I echo the sentiments in your nominee.
Thank you. Thank you.
And if you've got 300 pages that need reading, he just gave them to you. So. Thank you, Mr. Gedko. Next up, approval of prior meeting minutes. We've got 2 minutes in our package. One is July 9th, 2024, the special open meeting. So we just need to clean up a paragraph in that, and then minutes to start catching up August 8th, 2024 regular open meeting. I didn't see any changes to those minutes. There was one like typo addition that I made on the August 8th minute, and that's in board effect, but nothing of any substance. Commissioners, did you have any changes that need to be made to those minutes?
I do not. Thank you.
No, thank you. They look fine to me.
Okay, then I move that we approve the minutes for the July 9th, 2024 special open meeting and August 8th regular open meeting.
I second.
Mr. Cameron?
Commissioner Allison,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Connell,
Aye.
Commissioner Aguilera.
Aye.
We have a motion to approve the minutes for the July 9th, 2024 special open meeting and the minutes for the August 8th, 2024 regular open meeting passes unanimously, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. Next up is consent action. We have 6 cases on the consent action agenda. Commissioners, did you have any questions or discussion on consent items?
I don't have any questions. I do just have a quick comment on one of the items. This is item 4, which is a formal complaint against Timber on Water. So this order sets the matter for hearing, and at issue is essentially an amount of $1,700 to $1,800. I just want to note that I encourage the parties here to settle. I think that for the amount that is at issue, I'm not sure that Timberon's customers are better off by hiring counsel to help litigate this. And so I just wanted to make that. I think that I understand why the order sets this for hearing. I think that is correct, but I do see that complication. And so, wanted to encourage the parties, if they can, to work out their differences here.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Ellison, did you have anything?
I had a comment on the same case. At first glance, when I looked at this, I thought, perhaps this is something that we should consider asking a mediator to handle, again, given the sum involved. The more I looked into it, the more complicated the situation seemed. And so I do think the hearing examiner is warranted, although, I share Commissioner Aguilera's concerns, and it would be much better for everyone involved for the parties to come to a settlement. But in lieu of that, of course, we'll move forward.
Yeah, thank you both for that. So I'll go ahead and move approval of the final orders proposed on the consent action item agenda.
I'll second.
Mr. Cameron.
Commissioner Ellison,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Connell,
Aye.
Commissioner Aguilera.
Aye.
The motion to approve the six items on the consent agenda passes unanimously, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next up, we have case 2200124 UT Southwest Public Service Energy Efficiency Plan and the ICO request. Start with a presentation from Ms. Avila Stefans. The floor is yours.
Good morning, commissioners. So before the commission, there are several orders in response to two SPS motions in this docket. The first motion was a request from SPS that the commission grant leave for them to file an interruptible credit option on a standalone basis. They reason that given the importance of the program and the benefits to SPS and customers, and given the lead time needed to begin implementing the program, they would like to get started on that as quickly as possible. And the second motion SPS filed was a motion for variance of a commission order requiring SPS to file a new energy efficiency plan by November 19th, 2024. And the reasoning for the request is that SPS states that the current avoided cost data will not allow for material expansion of cost-effective programs through a new portfolio, and asks for and would like for more time to wait for the results of a all-source RFP, and asks for permission to file the new energy efficiency plan in May of 2025 in accordance with the schedule set out in commission rules. So before the commission are four orders. So order one addresses the request for an extension of time, and it grants that request, adopting SPS's reasoning. Order two also addressed the request for extension of time, and it explains that SPS has information it needs to update the avoided costs calculations based on assumptions made in SPS's IRP docket. Order 3, it combines the commission decision on both motions, and it denies them both. Regarding the request for extension of time, it adopts the same reasoning as Order 2. In response to the request to file the standalone ICO program, it denies that because SPS will have an opportunity to file that in November as part of the energy efficiency plan that they will be required to file in November. And then the last order is Order 4, which just addresses the request for the ICO as a standalone basis, and it denies it, or excuse me, it grants it, adopting SPS's arguments. In trying to figure out how to keep this conversation organized, OGC would suggest OGC would suggest looking at Order 3 as it addresses everything at once, and if the commission cannot deny or cannot agree on every issue, it could address each issue on standalone basis, but of course that is up to the commission.
Great, thank you for that suggestion. Commissioners, the volunteer to start on that, or?
Well, I mean, I have sort of discussion, you know, to provide, but before that, I wanted to ask a question. With respect to the ICO, is there anything in any law or rule that prohibits SPS from filing that outside of an energy efficiency plan? Recognizing that there is a commission order, but setting that aside for now.
Right, so there is no prohibition against offering that as a standalone basis. The complication arises because the commission doesn't have a standard for approving a demand response program outside of energy efficiency filing. So there would be question as to what standard of review would be applied on this demand response program if it was offered as a standalone basis.
Yeah, thank you for that. I had exactly the same question, but I didn't ask it as well as you did. It was, could they just file it under the PPA rule? And I guess commission has precedent for saying you can't. So if it's not PPA rule, what is it? And then I think that's an interesting thing to consider because technology has changed quite a bit over time. I'm expecting bids for things like virtual power plants in these RFPs, whether they come in demand response RFPs or the all source RFPs, I don't know, but I'm sure we'll see bids for those. And you can argue, is that demand response or is that a power plant? So anyway, we're in a weird situation here, I think, or we don't have the tools I wish we had at our disposal, I guess is a better way to say it than weird. But, any other questions, commissioners?
I'm not sure I have any questions. I did want to discuss some of the logic behind this order number 3 and why I think it makes sense to deny the extension request and to deny the standalone filing. I do agree with the logic that this calculation of the avoided capacity cost is an issue of the utilities making. We did not tell them through any orders or any rules that they should take such a narrow view that that they would look at the current 3-year period in question and say, if I don't need any capacity in this 3-year period, it means that the value is zero. You could have a great need in years 4, 5, and 6, and the program would still be around for those years. And so to say that there's no value in setting up a program that would have impact beyond the 3-year energy efficiency program, I do not see that as being a good approach. I think the utility has the data. It needs to come up with a reasonable estimate. I think no calculation of this is going to be perfect, but I think zero is obviously wrong. And especially for a utility growing at the pace that SPS is growing, on the face of it, it's wrong. And so there has to be a way for SPS to estimate this, either through information in their own IRP, information in other recently conducted RFPs, say by PNM or elsewhere. I think they can come up with some reasonable numbers here. The reason they came to us in the first place with this request, they wanted to amend the energy efficiency plan, the current 2023-2025 energy efficiency plan, to add this demand response program because they're underspending the 3% statutory spend requirement, and they're underspending because they're growing their load so quickly. We found that it was improper to do that in the current plan because of the way they had calculated the avoided capacity cost. They could not pass this UCT, this utility cost test. And so we asked them to, we said that we would like to see them file their energy efficiency plan in November, earlier than scheduled, and encourage them to include this in there. And I think that logic still stands. They can do a better job of estimating this avoided capacity cost, and they can file to include this plan, which would help in the underspending issue that they have for the energy efficiency plan. It would give us a standard by which to evaluate this program, because the Energy Efficiency Act does specifically discuss demand response, and it would save commission time in not having to deal with an independent case when we know we've got this energy efficiency plan. And as Ms. Stefan said, by insisting that we get the Energy Efficiency Act plan in November, then that's coming up very soon, and the utility can file for this demand response program in the near future through that vehicle. But this order number 3, does not insist that they file together with that, this demand response program in the Energy Efficiency Act plan. But by denying the independent filing, it's strongly encouraging the utility to do that.
Thank you. Commissioner Aguilera, did you have anything you wanted to add at the moment?
Well, trying to stay in line with the proposed structure of the conversation. I think that with respect to the ICO, and I'm trying right now to separate the ICO from the variance request, and addressing only the ICO. Just 2 or 3 weeks ago, SPS had a situation where they were calling customers, asking them to reduce their consumption because the system was strained. The ICO is specifically designed to address that kind of situation and address it without building new generation. I think address it in a smart way that optimizes the use of what infrastructure is currently installed, and in a way that is fair to those customers who have an opportunity cost. They responded to SPS and everything was fine. And so there's some goodwill there, but I don't think that we could rely on that to happen. I think I recognize that there might be questions as to how we would evaluate such a request, but I don't think it's that complicated. We look at whether the proposal is just and reasonable, and we look at whether it's in the public interest. And so addressing only that part of the order, I would be in favor of approving their request to file the ICO on a standalone basis.
Thank you. Yeah, and for me, there was 2 separate questions. One was the one you just described very well, that there's this ICO program, both their IRP and recent events help, I think, put context around why they're proposing it. So what's the most direct, expeditious path to approving that program was question 1. Second was, this started with they couldn't spend the minimum required for energy efficiency savings, and energy efficiency broadly also provides a capacity. So, I looked through the energy efficiency plan filing, and there is avoided capacity credit provided for energy efficiency programs over the life of the program when they're calculating the UCT test. But there's also cognitive dissonance of coming in and saying ICO provides capacity value and we should get it online right now in this period of time when their assumptions were 0. So you can't have both things. And then when you go back and look at the law, it's supposed to pursue all energy efficiency programs. The commission's supposed to act expeditiously on public utility. So how to solve both of those things, create a process where the ICO can be judged expeditiously, I think because of precedent, lining it up with an energy efficiency plan filings, the most obvious to me. It could be the lawyers at SPS can find something else. To Commissioner Ellison's point, this order 3 doesn't say you have to file it in the plan filing, but line it up with the plan filing. And then the facts obviously changed after they did the energy efficiency plan. They filed an IRP and sped it up because they need capacity right now. Agreed to do an ICO program with customers, so they need capacity right now. If you're supposed to do all energy efficiency, you should use your current assumptions. We have a problem we need to fix because they can't spend the money. So that's why I think the order that solves both the questions is order 3, which is deny the time delay on energy efficiency plan filing and, approve the, well, you end up denying the ICO request, but it allows them to file it whenever they want to, right? It's kind of the way I look at it. So anyway, that's long story short, they need to recalculate the benefit of energy efficiency and include the value of the ICO program in that calculation. So order 3 syncs those two things up. So anyway, I'm of the orders that are out there, it's funny because I could see a reasonable path to combining all 4 of these things, but coming in, order 3 was the one that made the most sense to me.
So to answer the second part with respect to the variance, I also do not agree with denying the variance. In the commission's order partially granting and partially denying the plan, the commission, as we recognize, strayed from the schedule in the commission's own rules and asked SPS to file earlier. The commission strayed from that schedule without input from SPS or staff or stakeholders. And so interestingly, SPS's variance request here seeks to put them back to where they would be under the commission's rules. And so I think both draft orders 2 and 3, which deny the unopposed variance request, claim that SPS can use the assumptions in the IRP to estimate the avoided cost and therefore does not need to wait for the RFP. And the 2 orders make this claim without providing evidence as to what supports that within the IRP. And the draft orders also do not explain why basing a new avoided cost on estimates, the estimates that we have right now, that SPS has right now, is a good idea. I mean, Commissioner Ellison noted using PNM's IRP. I would not suggest that. One thing that I've recognized from starting this job is that the 3 utilities are different. They're geographically different and their generation mix is different. And so I would not suggest using somebody else's IRP to calculate SPS's avoided cost. SPS explains that requiring a new plan in November will not meaningfully address their underage dilemma because current avoided cost data will not allow for material expansion of cost-effective spending through the new program portfolio, and that complying with the earlier filing deadline will force SPS to file significant modifications to its energy efficiency plan or to file a second plan to address the underage issues once SPS has the results of the RFP. I agree with that, and I don't know what evidence we have to doubt it. And the draft orders dismiss these statements in favor of the unsupported claim that they could use the assumptions in the existing IRP. So if we require SPS to file a plan earlier, we're likely asking them and their stakeholders to guess what the avoided cost is going to be and then have to correct it once the RFP results are known. And using these estimates, I think, could place SPS in the same situation it is now and forcing them into another situation where they once again have accumulated this underage. And so, and once again, the commission would be doing that without input from SPS, from staff, without input from stakeholders. So I think another point is that even if the commission believes that the data is in the IRP, this still overlooks the fact that SPS could engage stakeholders in developing a more comprehensive plan before filing it. And I think that requiring them to file it earlier robs stakeholders and SPS of that opportunity. And it would result in more difficult litigation. So the commission always needs to consider what is in the public interest, and I don't see how denying this request for the extension is in the public interest, especially when stakeholders have not voiced a concern about this. It's an unopposed motion. And then, so that, that's kind of the general principle of it, but I do have one last concern, which is like in the May order, we're straying from commission rules. The commission precedent and practice is to evaluate requests under the variance standard, and orders 2 and 3 do not do that. And I find that this is problematic because it treats SPS variance unfairly by not actually evaluating it against the standard like we do every other time for all other requests. And so, I think you can see that I support the first order and the fourth order that would grant both the variance and the ICO program.
Thank you. Question. So is the issue that the proposed order doesn't include a litany of all the stakeholder input that has been received up to now? So for example, IRP is an enormous stakeholder process. The ICO comes out of a stakeholder process. And then one of the things I object to was the concept that if we just wait for an RFP, we're going to have a perfect number. The way the number is created is by running what you think capacity costs through an Encompass model. So built into that model are hundreds of assumptions. There's gas prices, load forecast, all that kind of stuff. SPS vetted all those assumptions through its IRP. And so that would be with the timing that we're looking at, that's what they're going to have to use because that's what they have here. And it's not that was not a stakeholder process. So anyway, that's why I'm okay with order 3. The other reason I'm okay with it is we're faced with a novel situation. Used to be energy efficiency plans were happening when this rule was written at a time when the need for capacity wasn't as dire. So it was pretty common that you had to use assumptions on what capacity costs because you don't have an RFP. So just because there is one happening right now isn't different from the past. It's just an unusual opportunity is the way I look at it. And so does that unusual opportunity outweigh the public policy that energy efficiency is important and should be pursued expeditiously, or accomplish the goal that we started with ICO is hopefully it can avoid capacity that needs to get built. So can energy efficiency. If we wait until RFP resolves, we're putting energy efficiency potential capacity gains behind the results of the RFP in a timing thing. So you're not taking advantage of the opportunity through energy efficiency to reduce future capacity by granting the request and slowing things down. So anyway, that's just my philosophy that got me to where I'm at. And so I'm wondering is it just a principle, or is it the wording in the final order? Is there a way to get to order 3 that addresses the concerns you raised because they're valid?
I think with respect to is it a principle or wording, I think well, I would not call it wording. I would call it an implementation of the standard. I think it's both. It's a principle largely because of the timing. Here we have a utility saying, hey, in just a few months, we'll have much better data. I'm concerned that if we have them do it now, what SPS has alleged will happen, which is that they're using data that is not as good, and they will go into hearing and litigate this process with data that's going to only have to be updated in a few months. And so a lot of it is because of timing. I think that if we were sitting here and the next plan and SPS was asking, hey, let us file it 2 years from now, I probably would be more inclined to agree that that is not in the interest of the rule and does not meet the variance standard. But I'm having trouble identifying what is gained by making them rush a plan for just a few months. And so that's a lot of my concern here is what are we gaining? And so I think when I'm thinking about the public interest, I'm thinking that this energy efficiency plan is better served if we allow SPS and its stakeholders more time to develop a more comprehensive plan with better data. So a lot of it is timing, and then and that's just kind of the principle. There's also the additional concern that we are not explaining why in orders 2 and 3 the variance standard is not met.
Yeah, I think you make some excellent points, Commissioner Aguilera. I think one thing that we would gain by this approach is that we would most likely be getting this demand response program in the Energy Efficiency Act plan. And why I see that as valuable, first of all, is that there is that statutory 3% spend on the energy efficiency plans, which the company is not meeting, and including this demand response program costs in that plan would help it to meet that. If the if this demand response program were separately approved, the cost of that would not be included in the Energy Efficiency Act plan, and it would not help them attain this 3% minimum spend. And so they would have to spend extra on the Energy Efficiency Act plan to get to that 3%, and they would have to spend on this demand response program. So in terms of cost to the ratepayer, I think it would be more efficient to have it included in the Energy Efficiency Act plan. We could wait until May of next year to do that. However, you've articulated and the utility has claimed that they need to implement this program sooner rather than later. So to avoid the inefficiencies of having it as a standalone program, yet not to wait until next May to start working on it, the solution to me seems to be to say, let's go ahead and have that filing as we requested in our last order in November, and go ahead and include the demand response program in that. You know, as to your points on the capacity cost calculation, you know, I think the reason why the company calculated 0 for this 2023-2025 time period is that they felt no capacity is needed. It's not that they didn't have data from an RFP. They simply felt that no capacity was needed. Obviously, events have proved that to be wrong. So, you know, there really seem to be two components to this calculation of capacity cost. One is there a need? How much is that need? And what is the cost of that capacity? You know, I do think that, you know, although of course utilities are different. If we're having an RFP around the same time for solar in New Mexico, you know, we're gonna get somewhere in the same range. We shouldn't be getting wildly different results for that. And I think, you know, 0 is wrong, but, you know, using some other recent value which has, you know, been tested by the market, you know, I think there's reason for that. And I also agree that even after conducting the RFP, you know, they're not going to get some scientifically perfect number that's going to be correct for the next 3 years, even though, you know, it's sort of set for 3 years. So, I mean, there is some art to this calculation anyway. And I guess to the issue of, you know, the great need for this program, having them file it in September versus in November, you know, doesn't seem to be that big of an issue to me. You know, I would think that how they craft and justify the program would make more of a difference in terms of approval and timing of that approval. But, you know, I acknowledge you make some excellent points.
Yeah, actually, that gets me to a question for you, Ms. Stephans. Could you help us or remind me what the rule says about utilities' ability to adjust their plan within the 3-year period?
I cannot quote the rule directly, but our rule was drafted with consideration that modifications will be necessary to make sure that the plan is successful. So to the extent that modifications may be necessary, they will be, and they were contemplated. So.
Yeah, and I would note that we've already passed that phase. They proposed a modification and the commission rejected it.
For sure. To the extent that it relates to this new energy efficiency portfolio, it would,
Yeah, I guess from my point of view, the reason I rejected the modification is, to make Commissioner Ellison's point, they were very selective in how they modified and created cognitive dissonance, right? That clearly there is value to capacity right now. That's why we need the ICO. And then, but don't make me look at that for anything else that I'm doing. So it's one of those tough choices, right? That what's more important. And so what's more important for me is what the law tells me, that energy efficiency should be pursued, and it should be pursued in a way that can create a more efficient system so we don't have to build more stuff. So that's where I'm coming from on this. And so, yeah, there's conflicting things. Like I said, I could understand the argument for all 4 of these orders, but it's really about, don't tell me one thing on one hand and tell me something else on the other hand. You know, align what you're doing around what the law requires. And if the utility is supposed to make modifications, I don't see why we shouldn't also have that ability. And then, you know, the other side of that is we're required to act expeditiously. So why isn't the utility required to act expeditiously? So it's really not just sense of urgency. It's let's do this in a robust way that works going forward.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the discussion. You know, Commissioner Ellison, I think you make a really good point about having the ICO program in the energy efficiency. I think you explained some certainly valid benefits of combining them. You know, I think this was a good conversation. I think at the end of the day, we end up at the same place. At least, you know, the way it looks now. And well, yeah, I guess that's that's all I would say. Different ways of getting there, and we can you know, discuss which way is better, but I think at the end of the day, we end up at the same place.
Would you like to move your order, Commissioner?
I'd like to move that we adopt order number 3, denying extension and denying ICO on a standalone basis.
I'll second that motion.
Excuse me, commissioners, I'm sorry. I just want to make a clarifying point before we vote. There was a concern that Commissioner Aguilera raised that I want to make sure I address before the commission takes a vote. There was a concern that order 3 did not meet our standard for granting a variance, or our standards for granting a variance. I just want to clarify that our procedural variance rules set out the elements required in a motion, but the decision on whether to grant it or not is the standard review is at the commission's discretion. So to the extent that that was a concern for the commission, I don't think it should be.
I'll respond to that because I don't disagree that ultimately that's where we go, but I don't think it's fair to treat one proposal one way and then treat the other proposals the other way. When we get a variance, we look at whether it meets our standard. I think once we get into a situation where we're just choosing not to apply it and, you know, to just use our discretion, that's dangerous territory because we start to be unpredictable and are not providing the certainty that the industry needs. And so my preference is to always use the same standard so that we know that we're treating everybody fairly.
I appreciate that and broadly agree with it. This is a situation where we also can't ignore the facts on the ground. And so that's my choice, is to lean into loads growing and changes have value. Any other discussion, questions before we vote? Mr. Cameron.
Commissioner Aguilera. No. Was the motion seconded, Mr. Chair?
Yes. I seconded it.
Sorry. Commissioner O'Connell,
Yes.
Commissioner Allison.
Aye.
The motion to approve order number 3, which would deny the variance request and deny the motion, passes on a vote of 2 yeses and 1 no.
And commissioners, thank you for discussion. We work to get to consensus. We don't always get there. I think we all learned, I know I learned a lot, but, and then thank you, Ms. Stephans, for dealing with us while you've got 3 people pushing you in 6 different directions this time, so.
Only 4 different directions.
4 orders for 3 commissioners.
Yeah. Mr. Fisk, you were next up. Next up on the regular action item agenda is case 2000212 UT. That's a discussion of how to deal with a remand from the Supreme Court.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Because I gave you a very detailed memo, I'm just going to have a very brief discussion of the order itself, very brief, and then ask if there are any questions. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I have drafted an order upon issuance of mandate, which is a little different than other orders upon issuance of mandate that the commission has issued before. I recommend that the commission exercises its discretion to decline to issue a any declaratory order, which is again entirely within the commission's discretion and can be done anytime under our rule. And that's because I think a declaratory order is unlikely to provide additional clarity, because the opinion of the court is quite clear about its interpretation of subsection 2, the new fairly new provision in the Efficient Use of Energy Act. And it's also quite clear on the, if another petition is filed, what the burdens of that the utility has to bear are, and what tests the commission can apply. So if I did, if we did a declaratory order, it would really be like actual cut and paste, because I wouldn't want to deviate from this language at all. That's what I recommend. But no such order is needed. This provides as much the guidance that's needed. It doesn't address every single every issue that was raised on appeal, specifically about construction of 2 statutes. But and the court made an interesting comment that that the commission would be able to decide that the commission's reasoning on these issues is likely to change in view of the opinion. Those specifically concern whether the utilities ROE can be lowered if a mechanism is awarded, which the RD and the order said no to that, and whether there's any conflict between the subsection 2 as full decoupling and section 62.13.2 of the Public Utility Act, or I'm sorry, the Renewable Energy Act, which allows for a certain type of charge to be made for losses due to distributed generation. At this point, I don't know why this opinion would change these 2 statutes, but this can wait for another. It can wait for if another petition is filed. So, and since the court didn't actually provide their opinion on that, I think it's best just to be silent on that part, on the whole thing. So I'll take any questions.
Being the risky spot of trying to summarize what this is broadly, we're just closing the docket. And because there was nothing to change in the final order that was issued, there's also no action taken on the remand. Is that correct?
Well, the final order has been completely overturned in terms of it has been vacated by the court, because that's the power that they have, is to vacate the entire thing. I think that the guidance that's provided by the court itself is clear and detailed, and so the declaratory relief that was sought by the petitioners is unlikely to be helpful, because at this point, I wouldn't recommend making a declaration on the 2 things that the court declined to reach. That can be done in an actual petition case if it comes up. And it's very clear that the court is saying, this is a full decoupling provision. So there would be no declaratory order as was issued in the final order, because it's already been overturned. And I recommend not replacing, not affirming parts of it, and not other parts of it, because the commission can simply exercise its discretion, and the court's decision is very detailed, so I don't think it needs to be repeated in an order.
Thank you. Commissioners, did you have any questions or discussion on this one?
You know, I would just offer, you know, I certainly agree with this approach that the declaratory order was vacated and there really is no compelling reason for us to attempt to redo that order. The court has stated their position. In general, I don't know why we would want to do a declaratory order like this. I would think it preferable for a utility to propose something like this in a rate case, and then we would deal with it in the rate case as opposed to issue some standalone opinion. So I'm in agreement with what this proposed order is doing.
I also agree with the approach. Petition for declaratory order is normally to eliminate a controversy or uncertainty. Perhaps the court did that. And so I understand why you are recommending using the commission's discretion to not issue an order here. Thank you.
Yeah, then just final pile on. Thank you for bringing this. And it's novel enough. I think it was worthy of discussion in an open meeting. So thank you for bringing that. Having said that, I'll move for approval of the proposed order in this case.
Second.
Any more discussions before we vote? Mr. Cameron.
Commissioner Aguilera,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Connell,
Aye.
Commissioner Allison.
Aye.
The motion to approve the order passes unanimously, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, commissioners.
So next item on the agenda is a discussion item. We've been working on a rulemaking related to compliance with the emission standard and the Energy Transition Act. We've had several. We had kind of a pre-NOPR process. We had process following the NOPR. We've received comments on that. So now we have a draft of the rule that Mr. Lundin will walk us through, and then that'll just give you some time to consider it, and then we'll vote in a future open meeting, hopefully as soon as on 2 weeks from now. So take it away, Mr. Lundin.
Thank you, commissioners. So back in May of this year, we issued a NOPR to adopt the proposed rule to implement section 62.18.10D of the ETA, which relates to the carbon emission rates for qualifying utilities. As of August 30th, the formal commentary phase has ended and the record is closed. As the chairman noted, for today's discussion, I'd like to walk through the major issues stemming from stakeholder comments, show you how a final rule could look based on those comments, and allow time for commissioner discussions. My goal with this is to help narrow the focus for a final rule and a final order to be considered at the next open meeting on the 19th. Now that the record is closed, the commission's rules on ex parte communication come into play. And they last until the matter is no longer pending substantively before the commission. The commentary response received was maybe not as robust as we've seen in other dockets. However, that was somewhat to be expected because the rule is fairly short and it implements a niche portion of the ETA, and application only applies to one utility. So initial comments are received by PNM staff and WRA. Response comments were received by the same stakeholders plus NM area. The first issue area I'd like to address with you is the compliance, measurement, and verification periods. The proposed rule is drafted to include an annual compliance period starting January 1, 2025, and a triennial measurement verification period backdated to January 1, 2023. Although the statute, clearly provides a date of January 1st, 2023 to begin the processes. The proposed rule is drafted to be forward-looking without any retroactive application for purposes of the compliance provisions. Whereas the measurement verification portion of the proposed rule would have retroactive effect, but such retroactivity would only be for informational purposes. In comments, both PNM and staff oppose annual compliance. PNM proposes that the compliance period should begin retroactively on the date that it issued ETA bonds, sometime in November of 2023, and then to continue from there on a triennial basis according to the statutory schedule. Staff also opposes PNM's proposal. Staff proposes that compliance should begin on January 1st, 2023 and continue triennially after. WRA supports either annual or triennial compliance. For reasons not addressed by the commenters, the commission should issue a rule that doesn't have any retroactive application of any sanction or non-compliance provisions that also don't exist in the statute. Therefore, the proposed rule was drafted, correctly in that respect, but getting the wording right is pretty tricky because we have an annual compliance period that slots into a triennial period, in which the first 2 years of the first triennial period have already passed. So getting the language there is a little bit tricky, and I think it requires a bit more editing to get just right. But to maintain a forward-looking annual compliance with a triennial measurement and verification period, I'm going to continue to work on that to get it just right. But part of that requires being a little bit more explicit about 2023 and 2024. And I think that the rules should kind of be clear that those years in this forward-looking rule are going to be sort of accepted for purposes of sanctions and non-compliance. So the discussion draft that I provided for you will reflect those changes, but like I said, I think further clarification is still necessary with that. And then lastly, on this topic, for the next open meeting, I will be providing an alternative option for your consideration as well that represents a final rule that has triennial compliance rather than annual compliance. So there will be multiple options on that point. I'll pause here and allow for any discussions that you wish to have on the topic of compliance period.
Yeah, opportunity for commissioners to ask questions of
Yeah,
Mr. Lundy.
I guess, Mr. Lundin, I found this wording confusing in the section 10. And filing of an informational report after the conclusion of every third compliance period. So are we looking at a 3-year period and we're saying each year inside of it is a compliance period?
Yeah, so the way the discussion draft is written, and I think this is also the way the proposed rule was drafted, is that there are 3-year measurement and verification periods starting, January 1, 2023 to December 31, 2025 is the first one. But within those 3-year periods, compliance is looked at on an annual basis. So each year within the 3-year measurement and verification period is a separate compliance year. Does that answer your question?
Why even have the 3-year period if we're doing the annual compliance? Wouldn't it just be more straightforward to say annual compliance?
So I think the idea in the rule is that the commission would probably open a docket every 3 years to look at the compliance. And I mean, that's my reading. If you have a different reading or interpretation of it, then that's fair. But that's kind of the way I envisioned it happening.
I mean, this is a very minor point, but why would we open a new docket every 3 years? Why couldn't we have a compliance docket and then, we have a ETA compliance docket and we just make filings to that one docket going forward.
Yeah, and we could definitely do that. I think the rule doesn't mandate the commission open a docket. That was just the way that I was interpreting it. And like in the reliability rulemaking, we opened a docket there for purposes of compliance filings, and the same procedure could be implemented here. I don't think the rule ties the commission's hands in that regard.
Thank you.
Mr. Lundin, should we just be giving you our thoughts on all of these? Like the direction that we would support. I'm just trying to, kind of, I don't know, figure out what exactly I'm supposed to be doing here. I have taken a look at the record, and read the comments and responses, and I'm ready to talk. I just, we normally would do this like one-on-one.
Yeah, and we can have those conversations privately. This is more an opportunity for you to speak with your fellow commissioners while we have a quorum. To hopefully, my goal would be to narrow some of the issues down if we can.
Okay.
If we can't, that's also fine, but this is more for the three of you, and then between us individually, we can have as many conversations as we want.
Okay. Since you're asking about the 3-year compliance period, I will say, and obviously this is subject to change if we talk later, but I think the best reading of 62-18-10D is that the compliance period is every 3 years. I do see the other argument. It says measured and verified every 3 years. I do see how we can get to an annual compliance period and then measuring and verifying every 3 years. But for me, the cleanest reading of that is that a compliance period is every 3 years. Now, I do agree that if we do that, we should have an annual reporting requirement. I think that's helpful to track the progress. But I also think in particular that the compliance period being every 3 years is recognizes that not every year is going to be the same. And some years have, you could have extreme weather or some reason where your emissions are going to be higher. And I think that a period of 3 years is accommodates that, and also over that 3-year period accomplishes the same goal of reducing emissions to a certain level.
Commissioner.
In the spirit of here's an opportunity to discuss big picture with each other. I'll just give you a big picture how I see all these pieces that fit together, and compliance period is one of them, right? So the big things were compliance period, voluntary versus not voluntary program inclusion, how to deal with the market, and how penalties play into this rule. And so all those things kind of work together. And so having, that's what I'm trying to do, is just make sure that the sum of the parts work together, right? And so where compliance period matters is it's clear from the comments, and I believe this personally, that this rule should have some teeth. So there are compliance provisions, consequences of non-compliance in here. I think if it's just, let's look at things over a 3-year period, things can get pretty far out of whack, right? Because utilities are looking at fuel clause and making purchases on a 1-year basis, not on a 3-year basis. So lining the having at least a 1 year check-in, if not, that's when we're gonna measure compliance is important, unless you want to make the penalties really big, which doesn't seem like a great idea either. So keeping the penalties at what feels like a reasonable level to me and looking at it every year so things don't get horribly out of whack is a provision that seems to work together. Other provision that seems to work together is the voluntary program versus what to do with the fact that they're using resources that create RECs to comply with this. For me, this rule is different than the renewable rule, and RECs are how we measure renewable compliance. This is a rule that's about CO2 emissions. And if you look at, this rule will work into the future beyond the last ratchet in the RPS. So it's really about CO2 emissions. And then if it's about CO2 emissions and sales to customers, the voluntary program folks are customers too. So that's where the draft you got that I had a crack at includes just here are your customers, here are your sales, what are the emissions used to serve them. So those were the two biggies that and then of course if you're not involving the voluntary program, then compliance becomes tough. So those are the kind of things where I was seeing these big pictures of being related. So those were the two biggies in the rule. And then the biggie also for me is let's get this rule in place. So that's why I want to vote in 2 weeks, and thought it'd be helpful to have this forum. So we'll be in better shape 2 weeks from now. And that's mostly just because, it was supposed to be a rule that was supposed to be in place on the day we started on this job, and it wasn't. So sense of urgency there.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, well, I don't know that we have to go into that, but I'm not sure that I would agree that we had to have it in place. I mean, I think the compliance period starts on January 1, 2023. If the idea here was to have a 3-year measurement and verification, that doesn't come until after, which kind of brings me to another point, which you mentioned, Mr. Lundin, is about retroactivity and kind of those first 2 years. And I guess my question is, where does an issue with retroactivity come into play if the date in the statute is January 1, 2023?
So this is something that I intend on briefing in a memo, but to kind of give you a preview. So obviously the rule has provisions for penalties, not mandatory, they're permissive, but they are listed there. Those don't exist in the statute, right? So this rule would be creating some level of new requirements, which generally speaking have to be forward-looking. The commission can implement retroactive regulations under certain parameters. There's a 5-point test that the DC Circuit uses that our Supreme Court has adopted. But if you want to avoid some sort of, constitutional or retroactive regulation fight, then the safest way is just to make the rule forward-looking. But as I was saying, those penalty provisions being new, if you apply them to 2023 or 2024, it would be a retroactive application of a new requirement, which creates kind of legal issues, I'll say.
Okay, we could certainly talk more about that. I mean, I think, the fact that the statute mentions January 1, 2023 it's certainly something to consider, but yeah, I'm happy to talk about that more.
And, I do appreciate the opportunity to discuss this rule. I think that's very important. To borrow a phrase from our Supreme Court, I think the statute is not a model of clarity. Unfortunately, so it's stated that the utility shall not emit on average more than 400 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour by January 1st, 2023. And then it goes on to say compliance shall be measured and verified every 3 years, with the first period commencing on January 1st, 2023. So, if you're starting your compliance and measuring over 3 years, starting January 1st, 2023, how do you even have a number so that you comply with the 400 pounds by January 1st, 2023? That, just does not make sense to me. But, I do think that, in general, I agree that, the statute seems to be clear in calling for this 3-year compliance period. I think obviously the shorter you make the compliance period, the tougher it is for the utility to comply. I mean, at the extreme, if you look at an instantaneous number like a speed limit, you should not go above 75 miles an hour at any point in time. That would be impossible for the utility to attain, because there are going to be periods at night when there's no renewable generation on the system. And I think the legislature took that into account when they called for a 3-year compliance period. I know that PNM did raise the issue of when compliance should start. And, they argued November of 2023 when they actually issued bonds, because you do have this language in that section D for qualifying utility that receives approval of a financing order and issues sources of transition bonds. So, they would argue that they didn't become that qualifying utility until they issued the energy transition bonds. At the same time, there's a question of when they actually did issue the transition bonds and when they should have issued the transition bonds. And the difference was entirely at the discretion of the utility. So, I do think that weakens their argument as to that they would like to see a later date of initial compliance.
Yeah, I think just thinking about this paragraph is just fascinating, just trying to figure out what the legislature intended. And I was, you said earlier that, it's ambiguous, and the first time I read it, I read a lot of different things. And after the 200th time of reading this, and after reading the comments, I actually now think that it's pretty clear. So at least in my head, it's clear. So I know how I would write this rule. But yeah. But I do want to mention real quick about the penalties.
Commissioner,
Yeah.
if I may, I'm gonna go through each
Go ahead.
topic area,
Yes,
so
please.
we'll get
Sorry.
there if I'm allowed
Sounds
to
good.
proceed.
Yeah.
So if I may, the second topic area was the generation dedicated to voluntary program customers. The proposed rule is drafted to exclude from the emissions rate calculations energy from these generation assets that are dedicated to serving voluntary program customers. The inclusion of such language in the proposed rule to exclude that generation was done in part to elicit a commentary response. For the record, It was my recollection that the commission wasn't necessarily married to that language, but it wanted to elicit the comments. WRA supports the proposed rules exclusion. WRA wants to be sure that there's no double counting of the environmental benefits of renewable energy. That is, WRA doesn't want PNM to claim the environmental benefits of the renewable energy for purposes of this CO2 emissions rate limit, while at the same time, the voluntary program customers are also claiming the benefits of that for their personal reasons, such as corporate goals. It should be noted that this double counting described by WRA, it's not the same as the statutorily forbidden double counting that's described in the REA. Under the REA, there's unlawful double counting, and it's strictly related to the retirement of RECs for purposes of RPS compliance. But RECs and RPS are not implicated by the proposed rule or the ETA. NMPRC, PNM, and staff oppose excluding voluntary program generation energy. That is that they oppose the language in the proposed rule. And PNM provided some example calculations which show that this generation accounts for roughly 80 to 90 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour, which is a pretty significant proportion of the 400 limit. So the discussion draft before you shows those provisions marked for deletion, as that will be my recommendation. And I'll once again pause if there's any commentary that you wanted to have on that topic. I know Chairman already touched on it.
I just want to say I agree with that. I think, allowing the utility to include the voluntary generation is the right approach. Without doubt, it's included in retail sales because those customers are retail customers. And I think, the REC accounting is a separate issue unto its own, and ownership of the REC is not the same as CO2 emissions and does not imply any rights or ownership regarding the CO2 emission accounting. So I think it's reasonable to include that with customers in general.
I will proceed then. Thank you. So the next topic area is the emissions rate formulae. The proposed rule is drafted to include a formula to calculate fleet emissions rate without off-system sales, and a second formula to make the same calculation, including off-system sales. WRA questioned whether the two formulae as drafted would produce the same values. Because the utilities fleet would be utilized to make off-system sales, and both equations measure fleet data. Therefore, off-system sales may be included in both calculations. I think WRA's concerns may be correct. Therefore, I think it's simpler if we just eliminate the second formula and require that the qualifying utility in their reporting provide calculations under the first formula, once with and once without off-system sales included. I think that would be the most simple way to kind of clarify or solve WRA's concerns.
To clarify, Mr. Lundin, what you're referring to as the first and the second
Yes.
formula?
So the first formula is section 10, subsection B. And the second formula is subsection C. So the formula measures basically CO2 divided by energy. In the first formula, it's the fleet CO2 and fleet energy that's being measured. So if the fleet is being used to make off-system sales, then it would be included. But then the second formula says it's the same calculation, except it explicitly includes off-system sales. So So it creates a presumption that the first formula doesn't, but it might, or it probably does. So there's a little bit of a conflict.
Can you clarify practically in the formula are off-system sales from generation, long-term purchase agreements, 24 months or longer dedicated to serve retail load? Would those be included?
What's the rule? So I think McLee's is my off-system sales guy.
Okay, well,
So-
okay.
Sorry, I think the rule states that off-system sales are measured for informational purposes, but not for, I don't think they're factored in for compliance purposes.
I do have some thoughts here after looking at the record and going round and round on this. I think one thing that's easy to gloss over is the word dedicated in the statute, because if you're thinking about just, your generation to serve the qualifying utilities retail customers, I could see how you get to a point where, well, it's an off-system sale, it didn't serve the qualifying utilities retail customers. But once you think about the word dedicated here, I think it sort of changes that understanding and kind of places it more in what is the intention of this generator? Why was it procured? Was it procured to serve retail load? If it was, then it is dedicated to serve retail load, even if it is not, even if you're in a day-ahead market and you're selling to somebody else. So I think the word dedicated is something that maybe some of us have glossed over.
To respond to that, it seems to me that the key question is when the statute talks about the qualifying utilities generation and, long-term PPA energy, whether it's talking about physical plant or whether it's talking about power generated, because if it's talking about physical plant that is dedicated to serve the utilities retail customers, I agree, it should not matter the purpose of the dispatch. It should only matter what that physical plant is producing. However, if we interpret it to mean the utilities generation meaning megawatt hours produced that are dedicated to serve the qualifying utilities retail customers, then, I could see the argument for excluding off-system sales. So I think that is a fundamental question. And to me, I think it's somewhat contradictory how, we're defining the term fleet, which, to me, fleet means physical asset, like a fleet of vehicles, right? And then we say, oh, but and we should, for compliance, look at the fleet's emissions divided by the fleet's power produced. And then we say, oh, but we didn't mean that you should include the off-system sales. I think we could, if we want to focus on generation and not the physical asset, we could tighten that up and maybe use something other than the term fleet. But it is a major question. Staff makes the argument that that off-system sales should be included, that legislative intent really was focusing on the amount of carbon emitted by power plants in New Mexico, regardless of where the power was, you know, why the power was produced or where it's going. You know, at the same time, you know, there's the argument for that, you know, New Mexico retail customers benefit when the utility participates in regional markets and makes sales that drop the average cost of power to the consumer, and that the legislature probably didn't have regional markets in mind when this language was drafted. So, you know, I think, you know, there's something to consider.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that there are elements here that are talking about energy. I mean, when you're talking about emissions, you're talking about, I think, you know, it's something that's variable because it could be more, it could be less. I do believe that this paragraph is talking about capacity. However, I think it's focused on the qualifying utilities generation, and also so the qualifying utilities qualifying utility owned generation and the long-term purchase agreements. And so I think that includes the off-system sales that are made in an energy market, and I don't think that necessarily includes off-system purchases. And you know, thinking about what is the impetus of this, it's the closure of capacity. And so I think what it's trying to do is look at what capacity is left over. Like what is the trade-off here if you take this deal?
Shall I proceed?
Let me just make one more comment there. You know, I guess, you know, there's a lot of logic to what you're saying there. You know, one, I think, you know, perhaps unintended consequence of this is that the utility doesn't get credit for purchasing solar in the middle of the day from the EIM, right? It doesn't get, the EIM doesn't supply RECs, it doesn't supply zero CO2 certificates, even though everybody knows you're getting negative prices in the middle of the day because of excess solar in California. So the statute does not allow for the utility to get the benefit of that. But, you know, if we take that interpretation that we're talking about the assets, then the utility will take a hit for gas fired generation that serves others in the regional market. That doesn't seem fair, but it would be a logical outcome of that interpretation.
But and so that's why the question in the NOPR was included about, you know, WPTF had made a comment about the legislature was trying to disincentivize purchases, let further investment in fossil fuels. Some people agreed with that, some people disagreed with that. But I think if you agree with that and look at it that way, then I think the situation that you just explained, it's okay because we're really focused on the generation that is dedicated to serve retail customers and what that generation is doing. So it's not necessarily looking at generation outside of the state, not even looking at generation outside of the IOU's ownership, either, full ownership or through a PPA entitlement, I should say.
Thank you, commissioners. So now we come to the non-compliance penalty part of the rule. The proposed rule is drafted with a permissive schedule of monetary penalties associated with incremental pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour over the statutory limits to inform and guide future sanctions for non-compliance. The thresholds were 10,000, 20,000, 40,000. And they had a cap of at 200 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour. The proposed rules penalty capped out at around $5.5 million. Staff and WRA proposed that the sanction thresholds be increased significantly based on their review of the social cost of carbon and some other factors. Staff proposed increasing them to 40, 80, and 160,000 and eliminating the cap. So at the 200 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour over the limit, staff's penalty would be about $22 million. PNM opposes the language in the proposed rule, but does not deny the commission's authority to levy monetary penalties. PNM alleges that the predetermined schedule is not fact-based and it does not take into consideration mitigating circumstances. The discussion draft before you would increase the penalties to 60K, 80K, and 100K and would maintain the cap. This would be a larger first tier increase than staff proposed, but a smaller third tier increase. And it would obviously maintain the cap. At the cap, the max penalty would be about $17 million. Additionally, the discussion draft contains a new concept in subsection C that would permit the utility to, instead of paying a penalty issued by the commission, propose an alternative usage of those funds for purposes of advancing the purposes of the rule and or the ETA. So this draft language is still under consideration and it's provided here as an example for what may be presented in a final rule, but we're still thinking about it. And although subsection C is a new concept in this discussion draft, its inspiration comes from staff's comments. Staff had proposed that the commission allow penalty funds to be used as a credit for ratepayers, to be used for energy efficiency measures, or to be used for emissions abatement. Also, the commission has in the past issued penalties to utilities, but held them in abeyance while the utility performs some sort of, or conforms to some sort of a performance measure in order to satisfy the penalty without paying it. So again, I'll pause here and allow any discussion that you wish to have.
I mean, I would just say that I believe that there are benefits to having a penalty structure. I think that puts everybody on the same page. And I have some questions about the logistics of, what happens with the penalty. And, I would want to make sure that we run this by our ASD director and make sure that we agree, I think. But I do think that, the adopting the process of a show cause order is necessary. And I am also persuaded by the comments that were provided by staff and WRA explaining that the penalty structure that we had proposed was not sufficient. And so I would be supportive of increasing that. And then I do think that there should be flexibility for some other remedy, if it's not a penalty, for some other remedy.
Well, I guess I have, mixed feelings about it. Not having a penalty section would I think give us more flexibility, there can be, real reasons for a utility's failure to attain the required standards. And, I think whether a utility is acting in good faith to achieve the required emissions rate or not is, should be a factor in deciding whether and how much of a penalty to impose. And I know the language here is may be imposed, but in practicality, I think you would have to have a strong reason for deviating from this once it's placed in the rule. I do want to understand better where, the numbers came from, to feel that there's some justification behind them. Because obviously we're talking about, carbon intensity, we're not talking about a value per pound of CO2, because this is dealing with carbon intensity. You could have, at the extreme, the utility could produce just a few megawatt hours of power, not emit very much carbon, and get hit with a big fine for carbon intensity non-compliance. In reality, you won't see that sort of extreme, but anyway, I want to understand the basis of it better. I do like the idea expressed in C of allowing it to be used for some project or measure that would help towards greater renewable energy use and production. So I think that's a positive addition.
Yeah, and I do agree with that. I just, when I mentioned running this by our ASD director, I don't know if if we get some penalties, I don't know if we're required to give those to the Treasury and so that's the question there. But the idea, I agree with the spirit of it.
Do you want me to address that point?
Sure.
Yeah, so the commission's authority to sanction a utility under for noncompliance with the ETA or the CO2 limits could potentially come from three places. So first and most obviously is section 62.12.4, which is from the Public Utility Act. That's our section that says, the commission may impose fines from $1 to $100,000. And 62.12.5 is the separate and distinct offense provision that kind of goes hand in hand with that. So the explicit wording from that statute says for monies collected under the Public Utility Act. Now, the ETA is not the Public Utility Act, and the ETA has its own provision that allows the commission to impose regulatory sanctions, but it doesn't have specifics as to monetary amounts like the Public Utility Act has. And then the third piece is the PRC Act has 62.19.9B5 says the commission may basically enforce its orders through appropriate regulatory actions and orders. So if this penalty provision is based upon 62.12.4, I'm not sure if they line up exactly, because 62.12.4 explicitly says PUA and it doesn't mention any other acts. However, that sort of informs the way we think about monetary penalties because it provides us the $1 to $100,000 limit. The ETA is much less explicit, and in the language in the ETA, it does not have the same language that says any penalty levied must be remitted to the state treasurer. Same with the PRC Act, it doesn't contain that language about remission. The last piece of this is the commission has in the past issued penalties to a utility or to an entity and then immediately held them in abeyance while the entity performs some sort of performance measure that would, abate the penalty. So there are questions with the way these statutes play with each other and what the commission's duty is as far as remitting penalties to the treasurer, and that's something that we're still thinking about. But I think there is, potential room for this subsection C. But as I said, this is mostly just an example of what may be provided in a couple weeks from now, as we continue to think through this and work on it.
That was a really good explanation. And then somewhere in the draft, there is explicit language about the year, what is right now the compliance year 23 and 24. In some respect, I think that might be premature. I mean, I don't, the commission is not penalizing anybody right now, and so consider, maybe not including anything, and we can cross that bridge when we get to it, if we get to it. Just, one suggestion for your consideration there.
Well, from my point of view, this discussion has been mission accomplished. I've heard a few things that I'll go back and reread this with a different perspective, so that's good. Is there any other, and then of course, obviously you work with Mr. Levine on your own individual thoughts on this thing, but I'm still hoping that we can pull it together and have it back on the agenda in 2 weeks. So thank you very much, Mr. Lundin.
Thank you, commissioners. I had nothing further.
Right, and there's been a team working on this behind the scenes with Mr. Lundin, Mr. O'Donnell and Mackley Keyrol, and I'm sure I'm forgetting people there too, but just want to acknowledge the efforts to get us this far. We're not there yet because we still need to vote, but thank you. Okay, next item is communications with Chief of Staff. Did you have anything? Joined at the microphone by Troy Corey.
Good still morning, commissioners, just barely. There's a couple of things that I do want to update you on, you and the public, but I do want to start with asking you about our out of town meetings. We've now held 2 of them in like opposite corners of the state with a little bit of different format in each of them. And so as much for us to get on the same page as well as to kind of share what maybe we're thinking about as we go forward. I'm just curious if you have any input or feedback that you'd like to share with me, our staff, or the public, people who are watching.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'd say broadly, these meetings have been valuable. I was surprised by where the value came from. I thought getting out in the communities, we'd have more interaction with folks in the communities, and we certainly had that in Hobbs. Didn't have so much of that in Farmington. And then a lot of the value was, for me anyway, I got seeing is believing. So seeing 2 very different situations of things that are going on that impact the work that we do, that was very valuable. And then having said that, because we didn't have a lot of interaction with other folks generally while we were out there. I don't know that, I think we still need to get out there, obviously. Maybe we don't need to take as big a group with us, because so anyway, I think we can continue to do it and maybe be a little more lightweight with it.
Thank you, Commissioner. I do want to say there's no getting out of these. We've signed ourselves up for 10 of them. So, and they don't all have to be open meetings. They don't all have to be open meetings, but there's gonna be a lot of travel. So I want to make sure that we're having these conversations with ourselves and with anybody who might have thoughts or input as we think about it. So
Yeah, I
thank
mean,
you.
clearly we
Chair.
need to get to Las Cruces, El Paso, need to do some Bobcat dodging and go to Silver City. So yeah, the list of places we need to go is still apparent, so I don't think there'll be a hard time finding next places to go.
You know, just to add on to that, I think, you know, with Farmington, we obviously don't have an electric utility that we regulate that is there. You know, that probably had some impact on level of interest. However, we do have the gas company there. You know, I just think obviously this is something new that we're starting, and I think maybe we haven't quite figured out how to best reach out to folks in the community and advertise that we are having a meeting. I think, you know, it's hard work really getting the word out and, you know, really thinking through who to contact. I mean, I don't know if it's the, you know, if it's an economic development office or, you know, what, the mayor's office. I'm not sure. It, you know, clearly putting something in the local papers is something that we should do. I think sending a press release to the local papers does not equal getting something printed in the local papers. So we may need to take out an advertisement in the local papers and say we're coming on such and such a date. So it's hard to get the word out, but I think, you know, we're learning and we can improve.
Well, I agree with that. I think there is room for improvement in how we engage the public to actually show up. I mean, I often feel like it's my job to, you know, just be the person who people are mad at, you know. So I don't necessarily want them to like bring pitchforks and stuff, but I do think it would be beneficial to have more engagement. In terms of having open meetings elsewhere, there is a lot of value, I think, especially if we get the public out, but there's a lot of value for me personally in seeing these, you know, these other places that I'm not at normally, and places where people live who are impacted by the decisions that we make. We took a tour of San Juan, and I thought that was very beneficial, you know, to see it with our own eyes. You know, I had never set foot there in kind of like the property. I think I've seen it from far away, but I think there's a lot of value for that. And so I you know, leave it up to you and, you know, the chairman to see how many people, you know, need to attend those. But I do think that they're beneficial. I do want to make one clarification. You said we signed ourselves up for 10. I think we signed ourselves up for 5. And then it was multiplied.
And then a
Yes.
computer error gave us 10.
Yes,
As a
so-
gift, as a gift.
Yes. And then I just want to briefly thank Jennifer Baca, our executive assistant, who does a lot of work with the logistics to make those meetings happen. So just, you know, public shout out to her and thank you.
Excellent. I appreciate that, commissioners. And anyone who regularly attends our meetings and has thoughts about what we could do better, I'm open for that input as well. So just if you're watching or if you're here, let me know. In other things to update you on, I want to give you an update regarding our vacancies. As you know, July 1st, we had 13 new positions that had never existed here before. Jason Montoya, our Pipeline Safety Bureau Chief, has filled 6 of his 10 positions. So there are 4 more open in pipeline safety. The 3 others that are not in pipeline safety, as well as the 4 that are, we're holding on to those to generate vacancy savings so that we can ensure that we're balancing our budget. Although I do see those positions being trickling through the posting process here this fall. Our goal is to be largely down to the 3 to 5% vacancy rate by January 1st. And we think that's an achievable goal. We ended the year at 5%, so we think we can get back there by January. And I also, speaking of shout outs, that's a shout out to Jason, his team, and our HR team for just churning the mill and hiring people left and right, and they're really doing a good job. So we have excellent staff there. We're excited about everybody who's joined us. Next update I'd like to share is that we will be planning an all hands meeting for staff sometime this fall. It's in the infancy of the planning stages. The goal is to have that meeting before the end of the year and before kind of the press of the holidays hit us, or maybe between Thanksgiving and the Christmas holiday. So watch for that. We have a core team that has been voluntold as a planning team, and then we're going to be soliciting members from each division to be part of that planning team. So heads up on that. And then
I just want to say for the record that the only things I could contribute to the barbecue grill would come from the grocery store.
it depends on the time of year whether there will be barbecuing or not, because if it's around December time, maybe no one wants to be outside barbecuing. So we're gonna see how that goes.
I just don't want expectation that it'll be similar to past events.
We could spice things up. We'll see. We have a group of dedicated potluckers, and so maybe we'll lean on that. The last thing that I want to update you all on, and everybody who's listening, is the dates for the PRC seminar are November 4th and 5th, and maybe the morning of the 6th. That's yet to be determined on how the scheduling works out. We've been working with our internal professional development committee to identify topics for the presentations, and now we're working on filling presenters for those topics. So if anybody is interested in participating, presenting, let me know. We'll be sending out a save the date here shortly for people who are not interested in presenting, but interested in attending. There'll be more information coming on that. And with that, I stand for questions.
Yeah, thank you for that update. Especially the vacancy updates. That's great that we're filling those pipeline safety positions. I was kind of worried about that, but glad that's getting filled. Any other questions since we got her? Nope. All right, thank you. Next item between us and adjournment is communications with commissioners. No pressure, Commissioner Aguilera.
I don't have any announcements. I just, want to say that I appreciate the discussion that we've had today, and I really appreciate how prepared you both come to the meetings. I think that is, I really enjoy, even if we don't end up agreeing on these issues, just, talking through them and making sure that we arrive at the right decision collectively. So thank you for the discussion. No announcements.
For that, Commissioner Ellison.
I completely second that, and agree with it. I appreciate that, we can have discussions like that and then hit the reset button and we're looking at the next issue and we're not concerned with whether we our view was the one that was adopted or not. So I very much appreciate that spirit that we all have. I was at my first meeting of this Washington Action Committee yesterday, and it's going to take a few more meetings for me to absorb everything that they're talking about, because they've got I think there are at least 3 NARUC attorneys who are sort of lobbyists and who are engaged with Capitol Hill as a full-time job. And one of the things that was discussed is pipeline safety, that the Senate is considering a pipeline safety reauthorization that would really revamp funding for the statute. And I understand that what it would do is it would sort of, all state funding would start at the 80% level instead of each state having to sort of justify some minimum level. And you could request more, but you can also lose your funding if you don't grow the program. So, but it was also stated that given that we don't have long until the end of the year when this Congress is over, the odds of this pipeline safety reauthorization passing is very slim. But it's something to keep in mind, that it is a recurring interest. There was also some discussion of NARUC's advocacy around the NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act, how federal agencies would use it in their decision making around projects. And for us, that would really only apply, I think, involving tribal lands, where FERC would have direct authority over an energy project, whether, what sort of limits there could be or should be around how FERC is using those National Environmental Protection Act regulations to make decisions regarding the environmental aspect of these projects. So NARUC wants to limit how FERC is using the NEPA statutes to make decisions and is advocating for that. But I don't have a sense of how advanced that is or how likely that is to come about.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that also reminds me, check your inbox. There's another NARUC opportunity if you want it out there. There's a listening session with DOE and EPA about reliability. So they want regulators involved in that. So I'm not going to put my name in for that one. My committee chair is voluntold to be on that one. So I kind of think from that point of view, but if either of you are interested in that, I encourage you to put your hand up. I think it helps to have Westerners on those things, especially with what we heard last week about RAP and all the things that are evolving out west. And the issue you just highlighted, Commissioner Ellison. I'm headed off to WEC not next week, but it'll be the week after next week. So just before our next open meeting, they're gonna have their annual meeting and part of that is selection of the new member advisory committee folks. So I'll report on that when I get back at our next open meeting. And then last one, just personal point that if I'm on jury duty in Bernalillo County next week, so if you're expecting me to show up at a meeting next week and I don't, that's my excuse and I'm sticking to it. So, are there anything else or are we ready to adjourn? So seeing no objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all.